Welcome everyone to today's CIVIS webinar on Transdisciplinarity in Research and Teaching, which is organised by Hub One Climate, Energy and Environment. So this session is part of the ongoing webinar series where we're exploring different disciplines and how they come together to tackle complex challenges. And today we're going to be discussing the intersection between energy and biodiversity, a topic which is increasingly significant both in terms of research and policy as we face the challenges that we're facing. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Juan Malo to speak today. He is an ecologist deeply committed to using research to address environmental challenges. And his work focuses on the impacts of human activity on animal populations and ecological interactions, particularly vertebrate populations living near large infrastructures. So Juan is from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, where he teaches environmental impact assessments and supervises a range of students in the ecological field. And he's also my colleague in CIVIS Hub One, contributing to developing the masters and all sorts of things. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Juan. Juan, welcome, and I'm looking forward to hearing your talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ria. Thank you, everybody, for coming here today. And as Ria presented me, I will be talking today about decarbonizing electricity, decarbonizing the energy sector with some solar power plants and effects on biodiversity. I have prepared a little bit multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary seminar, and so I will be talking a bit about energy, about solar power plants, just prior to coming into short talk on effects of this kind of plants on vertebrates or in wildlife in general. The first point here today, I'm sorry for the complex figure, we should make the difference between primary energy here on the left of the diagram. You see oil, biomass, gas, coal, nuclear, renewable. Here is the basic, the primary energy we get from Earth, and it's the actual concern for us. This is the actual concern. You see here the red round there with numbers is the greenhouse effect emissions associated to this raw energy system. And we are not talking today exactly about primary energy, but about electricity. See here, it's on the second column, you will find in gray electricity, which in fact it will be a vector from primary energy to our uses, the ways we use energy in society, which is just represented on the right. So today we will be talking about the electrical system, and just with the idea that it's kind of midterm with the way from primary energy to the uses that society does out from energy. It's a bit old representation, and so these features here on the left are not very tight yet, but it's nice to see the idea that we are having electricity here. And at this moment, when this figure was done, almost all energy was made out of coal, gas, some biomass, some oil, just at the global level. Well, first of all, I will want to make just a small point on something we already know about the grid acceleration, the process we are having since the middle of the last century. And if you see just the total energy consumption by Earth, by all the human population, you see just the grid acceleration beginning in 1950, and in huge increase in the energy consumption. This is primary energy, and you may see here that coal, oil, natural gas are making the biggest fraction of this. Even if we go to just zoom to these last 50 years, you will see here how the increase is going on. So we have, let's say, one preoccupation, total energy consumption is still growing. Second one is CO2 emitting fuels are still growing. You can see this gas, oil, natural gas, oil, and coal. And in fact, if you go to how this increase is across different types of primary energy, you see that oil here is the first one, is the one which is growing still faster. And the second one is coal, so we are not having very good news here. But wind and sun begins to appear here as some energy systems, parts of the energy system which are really growing in the last years. And in last year, 2023, it was just among coal and oil. So we are still to curb the global emission and global energy demand, but maybe we have some positive news from sun and wind. And I hope we will talk about that today. If we begin with a figure you saw just 1 minute ago about how it's changing the total energy consumption, and you just put it into a change in percentage, you see that wind and solar power are growing significantly over the last years. In fact, these both technologies are those which are growing faster now, and both of them are growing just for energy production, for electricity production. You see that nuclear, oil, coal are still growing, but not so much in percentage, but as they are a huge part of the how to say the pie, they are still growing a lot. So these two types of energy are growing very quickly as energy production systems for this electricity as vector of energy. And in fact, if we go to just the global level, you see here is the percentage every country is spending electricity as the primary energy, and it's 10 to 15% at the end of the last century, and now it has grown to 15, 20, 25, depending on countries. European Union a bit more, but you see that it's a parallel trend everywhere in the world, or more in most countries of the world. And in fact, this trend can go much further, as it can be seen by some countries like Norway, Sweden, Iceland, where because of their special natural properties of the country, they have other sources of energy. They are not using so much petrol, but they are using a lot of hydropower, or they are using a lot of geothermal power. And they are working, their societies are working with a large percentage of energy made out of electricity. So electrification is a reality which is growing in societies, and which is a future trend we will have for sure. Okay. In fact, we have electrification and also renewables. Renewable energy, I will call it renewable electricity, even though, of course, it's not renewable, but it means electricity produced by renewable systems, is a relevant fraction in several countries in the world. See that dark greens here mean over 50 or over 60% electricity produced by renewable sources. And you see that there are several countries now which have already reached such kind of figures. Let's move to Europe. Let's have a look to what's happening here. And very quickly, we will go to Spain and our case study today. And just from this map, you can easily understand that solar is one of our main interests here. You see the European map on the right, and there, red colors means more solar potential for photovoltaic producing electricity. And you see that the relevant area, the most relevant area in whole Europe is the Iberian Peninsula. Spain and Portugal have the greatest potential for sun power. At the same time, Spain also has a long tradition now of wind power, wind stations. And as a result of this, it is what we are having now. The last year, we have the whole year, let's say the report of the former year finished, and you can see that over 50% renewable electricity was produced in Spain. In fact, in 2024, it was 56% renewable electricity. And if you see here on the right, wind, sun are dominant together with hydropower. This good news we have here can be reflected in one day, what's happening one day in Spain. And you can see two examples there on the left. One is at the end of up. You have one at the end of summer. This is September. And this is sunrise, sunset are separated here. And you can see that just the whole part of midday, we have a big yellow area, which is covered by sun. You see that the total daily, let's take this out, the total daily electricity production and consumption makes a curve with a maximum along the day. And you can see here that along this day, this yellow, which I show you, is sun, was dominating that part. Under yellow, you are seeing the dark blue, it's wind. And you see that wind is making also a big share. And hydropower is having two peaks, one in the early in the morning, one in the afternoon and night. And they are making a large fraction of the whole electricity production and consumption. If you go to a day in winter, in a short day, you see the sunset and sunrise as much closer. You have a much more smaller fraction due to sun. Even it's sunny, it's not so sunny. But we are having windy weather, and we have water from reservoirs. We are in winter with a lot of water in our rivers. And so there is a much larger production of hydropower. Anyhow, in both systems, in both moments, you may see some gray here, or just in the middle, here in the middle. And those grays here in autumn, in that dating by casualty, it's import electricity, but it might be like here also gas or maybe some coal, which is in some very tiny proportion here. But the point is that if you have a look at what's happening in one day in Spain, it's that solar power is covering much of the day demand, little in the night, because in the night you only have a small amount of electricity which can be stored. And the other renewables are making a large fraction, but we need still, of course, nuclear, which you can see very pale white, pale blue underneath everything, which is a kind of very constant, close to 20%. And also you need the support from other electricity, other power station producing CO2 emissions. And let's say that these 2 days were rather optimistic days. They are not not all days are that, because there are some limitations. There are days without water, of course, because of drought in summer. We have calm weather without wind. We have cloudy days. We have night. So with some limitation, the strategy to move to wind and sun is going more or less properly in Spain, and is making a relevant share of the energy we are consuming now. Okay, let's move now to solar power plants. Here on the right, you see a solar power plant from there. And here on the left, you have a graph showing the development of solar plants in Spain. See here on the left, the column is in megawatts. 1 megawatt, it's let's say that this is 28,000 megawatt. 1,000 megawatt is approximately the potential of a nuclear plant. A gas plant might be 500, 400. And to have an idea, these columns here, deeper, the darker ones, is the accumulated power, how much power we have in solar plants. The pale orange is the installed power we already have every year. So every year we are increasing like 5,000 or over 5,000 megawatts. And just altogether, we are not approaching the 28 or 30,000 megawatts, the whole Spain. So the tendency, as you see, is increasing very quickly. As you see, January 24 was approximately 25. January 25th probably is like 30, 31. And so we have many reading, let's say, festivals like here on the right, where you see politicians and the properties of this solar plant just entering, let's say, the beginning of operation of this plant. And also, when you go to at the end of the year, you have, for instance, the report from the Spanish Solar Union, and you can see there that we have large futures of million tons CO2 equivalent emissions avoided due to our solar plants in Spain. Okay, but what happened when we want to have such a nice solar plant like you are seeing there in one place of the country? Okay, this is an aerial view of a solar plant prior to construction. This is you will see just a few images from a video. You can see it's like 3 minutes, a little bit more. But we will see that here you have a crop area where they will install this solar plant. These were crops. You can see here cereal growing on this side. And just when we begin the construction, machines will enter and they will remove all the soil and begin just the construction, just from, let's say, from the whole area. You see here 90 hectares in this case, close to 2 hectares for 1 megawatt. They remove the whole soil. They will make the, let's say, engineering and electronic construction of this with more industrial construction or more the solar field construction, which is more or less simple, as you can see here. And of course, they will connect it later. I see 50 megawatts in this case. This is a very regular plant in Spain, the typical one. And yes, at the end of approximately 1 year, a bit more, you will have just this solar plant ready to be plugged into the system and to begin production, as you say before. But, okay, see here the graph we saw before, and I will show now something which is the reality, the prediction, is the rocketing of our solar plants. I wrote there 2030. This is the prediction by 2030, but it's not my own prediction, but the prediction by the National Plan for the Development of Energy and the, let's say, alleviation of climate effects of our energy system. Then, by 2030, it's expected to have close to 80,000 megawatts, not all of them on the ground on large solar plants, but over roofs. But that may anyhow be about 120,000, 150,000 hectares across Spain. And the question here is, well, but this is a lot or is not much? And I just get out some features which come from our landscapes, our agrarian landscapes, and you will say that cereals of olive trees may cover some million hectares in Spain, but if you go just to other permanent crops, like just almonds, citrus, you begin to see here that the features are not that different. So let's say that we have one new permanent crop in Spain, which is called photovoltaic plant. Yes, our plants are already a distinct landscape element in many areas in Spain, and they will be more and more often found there. And along the next decades, they will become very common, and they will not be impact-free. I can just guess, not so much. The point here is when we move to biodiversity effects of solar plants, we discover that there is extremely little knowledge. The point here, again, is that this is a new technology, and if you go just here on the left, you see one of the newest revision by some colleagues of my department, so that almost there was no publication just at the beginning of the century. We are 211 here. There's a couple of papers there. The other review goes a bit further, and you see also that some reports, some plans, some models of what would happen with solar plants for paper were already published, but the number of published papers is small. The share among areas is rather biased, so that we have several publications from the States, America, some from Great Britain, France, some from China, but in fact we are very short of scientific knowledge about what will happen or what's happening whenever we put a solar plant on the ground. Hundreds of hectares, and there is little knowledge about that. What do we know about that? This is a review from one of these reviews. You see here that most studies have been done in desert or agroecosystems on some grassland. This is a clear bias by the North American case. Desert is overrepresented. This is a situation where we will have solar plants, but in Spain, for instance, not for sure. There's a very few of them can be in semi-desert conditions, but most of them will go to agroecosystems or areas similar. And of course, we have very few of them on scrublands, forests, and areas with more dense vegetation. If we move to the right and you see, okay, this is the places where these studies have been done. And on the right, you see what kind of studies have been done. And you see that it's surprising. Most studies have been devoted to soil, microclimate, microorganisms. And that's because most studies have worked on the very local scales of the situation under solar panel versus outside the solar panel. We will go on that later. But in fact, these changes in soil and the conditions of soil and microorganisms led also most of the studies on arthropods and plants as well. And so you see that most studies are very focused on that. And then if you pay, for instance, attention to birds, which is a typical taxon for which we know very much in many cases, you decide that extremely little knowledge about that. There's a few papers on that, as well as on bats or mammals. This review shows a very similar situation. There is a very parallel situation. Of course, most papers are probably the same or just the same. And you see here important that the context area is not studied. Most study is just the present, what happens when you put a solar plant or the solar panel, but just the presence of the construction or just the construction by itself has been very little studied, or there are some also studies on what happens about management, what happens if we mow or not mow the grass there and things like that, but studied is very scarce. But the landscape scale, just for the area, the whole solar plant, strongest effect is associated with habitat loss. We saw before the area which will be destroyed, in fact, and so the direct impact by habitat loss is straight, and also it's associated to death of individuals from a species with low mobility of plants or so on. And also we should pay attention that the destruction is just direct, but also let's say that there's a belt around any of these situations where any of these plants where also the habitat is so fragmented or so degraded that animals will not use it. For instance, on the right, you may see this is a plan of another solar plant. You see on red more or less the limits, and the map with colors, greens, orange, red, show the traditional area of occupation by the steppe bird, which for sure disappeared from all the area inside the solar plant, and most probably also from this corner here where they were previously living very close to the location of the built afterwards. This is for the environmental impact assessment, but this was where they planned the solar plant. The second level of impact is that once you have such a huge surface fenced, you will have an avoidance because of fencing plus the avoidance because of behavior. And so the landscape is fragmented, and any animal trying to move from here across will not be able to do it, and they will avoid or preclude animals to access to very relevant resources, very often to move from, let's say, uphill, downhill, maybe to a river to drink, but also just to move to use any kind of, or most kind of resources they would encounter there. This means habitat fragmentation, which in the long run may impair the population survival of several species. Also, at this scale, heat island is an effect which has been described, and this makes kind of a species filter. Some species may stand with that and stay there, but very often will go out from there, and so you will lose even more species there. Also, we will find some winner species. Some species will get advantage of this new situation, and so we'll have at the end a balance of winner and loser species along the whole area, and it will also multiply by the effect of cascade effects across ecosystem interaction networks. So this is something little known, but which will happen for sure. So let's stop a little bit on what's happening on the small scale. You see here the solar panels, we are working there. You see here the frost in the morning. Also the panels were frozen, and you see here there is no vegetation here. Frost is still there. And on the right, you see the diagram showing rain falls into the panels, go there, and there is a runoff area here. There is a shade area with shade, but without water, which corresponds to this, will completely get dry. And so the special area is this open area with grass. In fact, in this rosy morning, at the beginning of the morning, you will see even this frost from the solar panels just melting and falling into a runoff area. So you will have a very special vegetation. You hear that it's growing more, and it's even green at the beginning of the summer, just after everything has grown. This is the kind of effect of changing moisture, light, temperature, changing the soils, plant, invertebrates. This is the micro scale change we talked before, and the variability at the micro scale, you can see this very well in the picture. This change not only plants, but also animals. For instance, a pollinator will change here, and it's something that we don't know how it will run, but we know that there is a community shift in this case, from a cropping area to a kind of permanent grassland with extremely high spatial variability, which might be nice at least to study. The second point is with vertebrates. With vertebrates, we know very little, but we know that there is a strong rejection by these animals, by most species, to this area. There are some of them who would live inside, but most of them will not. And also, there has been described a mortality, a relevant mortality of birds at much smaller for bats in these places. So these are the changes that are already described. Just I will spend 1-2 minutes in what we are doing now on that. We saw the solar plant. We have the hypothesis that this kind of species, rabbits, as well as small mammals, will have increased populations. Some predators might go there for hunting, and so they will maybe control this population, but we don't know really. But luckily, we had last year with a pilot project funded by our company just to study this, and very quickly we could see in this plant that small mammals were not increasing, at least at the moment of the plant, inside the plant. Rabbits, not at the general scale, but locally, yes, they are beginning to make problems. As you may see here, these burrows just underneath the panels, and that may be a problem. Raptors increase a little bit on the area, not very much, but especially resident species increase a little bit the use of the area. But what's more relevant we discovered is that mesocarnivores did not appear at all in the area. So if they disappear, the control is broken, and we can predict very quickly that future problem in the agrarian context whenever we put such a big plant in areas with this prey and little predators. Just for future, we are now waiting for the response of the National Research Agency to work on this kind of structure, but across a gradient of more or less vegetation and ecosystem perturbation, so that we can maybe try if in areas with a better population sources for predators, we may have a different output, and under such a situation, there's a real possibility that predators control, more or less control, prey species. And well, there are many final thoughts we can say, I'm going to discuss afterwards, but just for the question of brevity, I will just stop here, and maybe I come back to these final thoughts in the discussion.